Former President Donald J. Trump has been impeached twice, banned from Twitter, and is facing a slew of civil and possibly even criminal legal actions. But there is one sanction which President Trump does not need to worry about at all, and this is being expelled from the Republican Party. And I don't mean he doesn't have to worry about this because he still remains very popular among Republican Party rank and file. He does, of course. But that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. What I mean is, even if Trump's support within the party was to dwindle to nothing, or if an anti-Trump faction seized total control of the party machinery, President Trump would never need to worry about being expelled. And it's not just President Trump who doesn't have to worry about this. In early 2020, President Trump's son, Donald Jr., called for Senator Mitt Romney to be expelled from the GOP. And by the way, GOP stands for Grand Old Party and is a longtime nickname for the Republicans. In 2020, during Trump's first impeachment trial, Senator Romney became the first U.S. senator in history to vote to convict a president from his own party. In the eyes of many Republicans, and especially Donald Trump Jr., this was an act of supreme disloyalty. But Senator Romney was not expelled by his party. Not because most people think Donald Trump Jr. is an imbecile. No, Senator Romney was not expelled from the Republican Party because he can't be, nor can anyone else for that matter. And before anyone thinks I'm just dunking on Republicans in this video, the same goes for America's other major party. It is just as impossible to kick anyone out of the Democrats, or, more famously, to prevent someone from joining, leaving, joining again, and then leaving again. This is how the independent senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, who famously called the Democratic Party ideologically bankrupt, among many other insults, and who is widely detested by much of the Democratic Party establishment, has nevertheless managed to almost capture the Democratic Party presidential nomination, twice. You see, America's major political parties are unlike any other political parties anywhere else in the world, and especially in free countries where the right to freedom of association is taken seriously. In fact, by the standards of most political systems, the Republicans and Democrats are arguably not even real political parties. What we Americans call parties are really just state-sanctioned labels for two non-hierarchical, highly decentralized coalitions. Neither party has a clearly defined membership, a formal leadership, or an enforceable set of rules. Rather bizarrely, in terms of organizational structure at least, the Republican Party has much more in common with deliberately decentralized groups like Black Lives Matter or Antifa than it does with the main center-right parties from other countries like Canada or the United Kingdom. And that's weird. Hi, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and welcome to another edition of Strange Politics. If you like this video and want to see more like it, or if you have a suggestion for a topic for another video, let me know in the comments. And please be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes out. This video is about America's two really unusual major parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And by unusual, I mean these are parties which have no institutional control over their membership, who their candidates are, or what policies their members pursue. This is the first video in what I think will be a two-part series, maybe three, and in this one I'm going to specifically focus mostly on party membership, or rather the complete lack of it. This weirdness is rooted partly in America's unique political culture, but mostly it exists because it is enforced by a thicket of state and federal regulations, which, I would argue, fly in the face of protections granted by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So, let me start by explaining how political parties work in virtually every country except America. Visit the website of the UK's Labour Party, traditionally one of the two biggest parties in British politics, and the first item on the top menu is Join Labour. Visit the website of Canada's Conservative Party, once again one of that country's two biggest parties, and on the top right the word Join is prominently displayed in the top menu. Here's the website of Ireland's historic ruling party, Fianna Fáil. See the prominent Join button? How about Australia's ruling Liberal Party? The appeal to join the party is not quite as dominantly displayed, but it's still really easy to find. So just remember this. All of these parties consider joining to be important and encourage people to do so. What it means to join one of these parties varies from party to party and country to country, but as a general rule, it goes something like this. Party members pay a membership fee. It's normally a fairly small amount, say $20 per year or something like that. Once someone signs up as a member, they get to play some part in selecting the party leader, selecting candidates for office, and sometimes they get a say in determining official party policy. Although I'm an American by birth, I live in the UK, where I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats, or Lib Dems. As a member in good standing with the Lib Dems, I can vote in party leadership elections, vote for who will be our local candidate at the next general election, and even vote on policies at party conferences. Crucially, non-members do not enjoy these same privileges. Unlike the way America's two parties work, people who are not members of the Liberal Democrats are excluded from voting in our leadership elections. They cannot have a say in who our candidates are, and they certainly don't get to vote on our party policies. And, importantly, if I violate party rules in an especially egregious way, I can be kicked out, and then I will lose the privileges of membership I've just been talking about. Being kicked out of a party is an unlikely scenario for most members, but it does happen. For example, back when the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP, was still a viable force in British politics, it would regularly find members who had previously belonged to an avowedly racist party called the British National Party, or BNP. UKIP membership rules explicitly excluded anyone from joining who had ever been a member of the BNP, so when these people were found out, they were immediately expelled. I agree with almost none of UKIP's policies, now or back when they were relevant, but I do think it is their right to disassociate themselves from the most extreme sort of racist. Another really notable UK example is Alastair Campbell, one of Tony Blair's most important advisors in the Labour government during the late 90s and early 2000s. In a 2019 BBC Radio interview, Campbell said he had voted for my party, the Liberal Democrats, in the recent European parliamentary elections. Voting for a party other than Labour is a violation of Labour Party rules, and following Campbell's broadcast admission, he was expelled. That may sound extreme, but again, the Labour Party should have the right to set its own standards for membership and get rid of people when these standards are not met. It's something virtually every organization in the world can do, from trade unions to churches to bowling clubs. But America's Republican and Democratic parties are not at all like this when it comes to membership. I'm going to have to explain how and why in a few phases here, so bear with me. Perhaps the weirdest thing about the National Republican and Democratic parties is they don't actually exist. And I really mean this. There are no national organizations called the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. If you turn on any cable news station in America, you will hear these terms bandied about constantly, as if they do exist. But trust me, as organizations at least, they are complete fictions. What does exist, and are very powerful, are the ideas of these parties. But these ideas are not safeguarded by any one group of people. Sure, there are people who claim to lead the Republican or Democratic parties at the national level, but this leadership is entirely informal, and it's not at all like party leadership in virtually any other country in the world. There are websites which appear to represent the National Republican and Democratic parties, GOP.com and Democrats.org, but you will notice that on these sites there are 0 appeals to join. There are appeals to sign up for newsletters, volunteer, donate, and buy stuff, but not join. And the reason is simple. There is nothing to join. Both of these websites are actually maintained by national committees, the Republican National Committee, or RNC, and the Democratic National Committee, or DNC. But these are not parties, and you cannot sign up to join them. The functions of the RNC and DNC are almost entirely administrative, and surprisingly limited. They organize debates during the presidential primaries, they organize national conventions every 4 years, and they provide administrative and fundraising support to their party's presidential nominees during the final months of the campaign. But even this last part is not automatic, and varies in scope from presidential cycle to presidential cycle. No candidate or office holder is in any way beholden to their national committees. They are free to ignore them whenever they want to, and they often do. And neither the RNC nor the DNC can expel anyone undesirable from their respective parties because, as I said before, there's nothing to expel them from. Just stay tuned for a really astounding example of this. So I expect some people watching this are thinking, hey Fredo, isn't this just a semantic argument? America's politics is federal, so it hardly matters if there are no national parties. People just belong to their state Republican and Democratic parties instead, right? And I would say, yeah, you're right. Americans can join the Democrats or Republicans at the state level. But only if they live in Hawaii or Wisconsin. These are the only two U.S. states which actually have genuine membership systems for both major parties. Democrats, but not Republicans, can also join a state-level party in Michigan, and Democrats can also join territory-level parties in Guam and American Samoa. But that's it. No other state-level Democratic or Republican party in the country even appears to keep a membership list. And if you don't believe me, in the description of this video will be a link to a Google Sheets document with links to the constitutions or bylaws of every state and territory, Republican and Democratic Party in the country, at least the ones that have websites. Go ahead and check them out. In 30 U.S. states, plus the District of Columbia, voters are asked to declare their party affiliation when they register to vote. When many Americans say they are a member of the Democrats or Republicans, this is often what they're referring to. This is such a normal part of American political life that I think most Americans never stop to think how bizarre this is. Political parties are, in theory at least, private institutions. Why would telling the government which party you support, but not the actual party itself, be a way to join? Can you imagine signing up for membership in a trade union because you tell the government? Or having to change your status with the government if you wanted to switch from being a Baptist to a Presbyterian? That would be outrageous. And yet, when it comes to politics, this is suddenly okay. State-level parties in the 30 states which record party affiliation have, for the most part, outsourced their membership lists to their respective state governments, which is really, really strange when you think about it. And the state parties don't just go along with this, they embrace it. For example, according to the Utah Republican Party Constitution, anyone who registers as a Republican with the Utah government is a member of the Utah Republican Party. And this is the actual reason why Senator Mitt Romney cannot be expelled from the GOP following Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet. Mitt Romney is a Republican because he told the Utah state government that he is one. And he will remain one, no matter what, until he tells the Utah state government that he isn't. But 20 states do not ask for party affiliation during the voter registration process, and in these states, the membership rules for joining a party are actually even looser. For example, in my home state of Georgia, the state Republican Party Constitution says that any registered voter who is in accord with the principles of the Republican Party, whatever these are, is automatically a member. So becoming a Republican in Georgia is a mental state, I guess. Vermont is particularly interesting. To be a fully fledged member of that state's Democratic Party, you only need to be a Vermont registered voter and support, quote, the purposes of the state committee. That's an extremely low bar, and it also explains how Senator Bernie Sanders can drop in and out of the Democratic Party whenever he wants to. He only needs to decide whether or not he supports the state committee at any given moment in time. When Sanders registered his 2020 presidential campaign with the Federal Election Committee in February 2019, he listed his party affiliation as Democratic Party. But less than 2 weeks later, he also registered his U.S. Senate re-election campaign for 2024, and on this form, he listed his party affiliation as Independent. So during most of 2019 and 2020, Bernie Sanders was both a Democratic and Independent candidate at the same time. In 2016, former Senator Barbara Boxer tweeted that Sanders was a Democrat some days. I think this may have been an attempt to sort of embarrass Bernie Sanders or something, but it's just stating reality. That's what the rules of the Democratic Party allow, at least in Vermont. So some people at this point are probably wondering why this matters. Who cares if anyone who wants to can just become a Republican or a Democrat? I mean, Hillary Clinton cared in 2016 when she found herself unexpectedly under attack from within her own party by someone who, until 5 minutes ago, had worked to destroy that same party. But why should anyone else care? Well, there's this thing which is widely accepted as a fundamental and basic human right around the world. It's called the freedom of association. This right allows anyone and everyone to organize themselves into groups for peaceful purposes. And the most important expression of this right is when citizens organize themselves peacefully to pursue political aims. Implicit in the freedom of association, of course, is the freedom not to associate. People should have the right to organize themselves around a common purpose and exclude people from that group who do not support that common purpose. A classic example is the one I mentioned before, the British party known as UKIP. Sure, I think they're a really obnoxious party which peddles softcore racism, but I support their right to exclude members who want to peddle hardcore racism. The U.S. Constitution does not explicitly guarantee Americans the freedom of association, but most constitutional scholars believe this right exists under the protections afforded by the First Amendment. Numerous Supreme Court decisions have upheld this argument, concluding, especially when it comes to association for political purposes, that the right to associate with like-minded people for a common purpose is derived from our fundamental right to freedom of speech, and that the right to exclude people from a group who do not share that common purpose is an essential part of that right, even when that common purpose is controversial or unpopular. But inexplicably, the various state and federal election authorities out there choose not to extend this right to American citizens when it comes to political parties. And if you think that sounds like an overstatement, just listen to this. In 2017, Illinois resident Art Jones filed his paperwork to run for the U.S. House of Representatives as a Republican candidate in the Illinois 3rd District for the upcoming 2018 midterm elections. This is a district which traditionally votes heavily Democratic, so the chances that a Republican could win were very low. And because the chances of winning were so low, no Republican other than Art Jones bothered to enter the race. Because of America's unique and I would argue insane candidate selection system, which will be the subject of part 2 in this series, this made Art Jones, by default, the official Republican candidate for Congress in the Illinois 3rd District. But there was a problem. You see, Art Jones is a Nazi. And I don't mean he's really conservative or that he says unfortunate things about black people after a couple of beers. I mean he is an actual Nazi. He is a Holocaust denier, an anti-Semite, a white supremacist, and even describes himself as a former leader of the American Nazi Party. So yes, Art Jones is, quite literally, an Illinois Nazi.
Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis.
But Jones has also been calling himself a Republican since the late 1980s. And calling yourself a Republican is, unfortunately, all you have to do in Illinois to be one. So, avowed Nazi Art Jones was perfectly entitled to also be an official Republican candidate for Congress. Once the Republican Party establishment realized what had happened, they were understandably horrified. Illinois Republican Party Chairman, Tim Schneider, issued a statement which said, "Arthur Jones is not a real Republican. He is a Nazi." But this statement is not entirely true. Yes, Art Jones is a Nazi, but he is also a Republican. The Illinois Republican Party allows anyone to be a member, even Nazis. I wish this wasn't the case, but it is. The communications director of the Republican National Committee, Michael Arons, said something just as toothless. "We condemn this candidate and his hateful rhetoric in the strongest possible terms." Gosh. Neither the state Republican Party nor the Republican National Committee were able to prevent Jones from being the official Republican candidate at the general election, and nor were either able to officially remove him from the party itself. All they could do was tell people that they didn't agree with him. They even blanketed the Illinois 3rd District with robocalls, which told voters to stop the Illinois Nazi. So instead of having the freedom to disassociate themselves from an extreme racist, the Illinois Republican Party had to invest time and money trying to publicly distance themselves from Jones. They did work very hard at this, but Jones still managed to get over 25% of the vote in the general election. Many of Jones's voters, trusting the label Republican, were probably unaware they were voting for a Nazi. Meanwhile, Jones and his political beliefs received prominent media coverage in the local and even national press, spurred partly by the many condemnations he received, which is exactly what Jones wanted all along. Republicans everywhere were understandably embarrassed, and I have genuine compassion for them here. I'm no Republican, and I really don't like the Republican Party, but I don't believe Illinois Republicans should have to be associated with a Nazi against their will. That is wrong, and is clearly a violation of their freedom of association and their First Amendment rights. So you might be wondering, okay, why don't state Republican parties change their rules to allow them to expel Nazis or anyone else really horrible? And answering that is complicated for several reasons. The idea that political party membership should be open to anyone who wants to identify with a party is deeply ingrained in American political culture. Even though there are practically no other organizations in America administered in this way, I just don't think it occurs to most Americans that it could or should be different. It's a sort of blindness or failure of imagination. But America's political parties are also tightly hemmed in by a slew of federal and state regulations. These vary substantially from state to state, and explaining them in any detail would take hours, if not days. But basically, election rules essentially reduce party membership to mere labels. Getting on the ballot is relatively easy as long as you are willing to accept a label from one of the two major parties. And if you're willing to accept one of these two labels, there's nothing either party can really do to exert any control over you. And if you get enough media attention and win a big enough election, you can essentially control whichever party you want. I'm going to cover this part of the process in part 2, so stay tuned. So whatever happens in the coming years, without some really serious political reform, Donald Trump never has to worry about being expelled from the Republican Party, no matter what he does. And by international standards, this is extremely unusual. What I mean is, it's entirely normal for a major political party, following a crushing defeat, to distance itself from its defeated leader. Historically, defeated presidents in America have mostly dropped out of politics for quite a while, out of shame or embarrassment, but Donald Trump has neither of these emotions. In other countries, when a former leader won't go gracefully, they are sometimes pushed out. This happened recently in the UK's Labour Party, a party which, as this video proves, regularly asserts its right to disassociate from people it doesn't agree with. But anyway, when Jeremy Corbyn dodged responsibility for his party's record on anti-Semitism during his time as leader, current leader Sir Keir Starmer suspended Corbyn's membership. This was controversial, but perfectly legal. But even if Trump leads his party to yet another historic defeat, or if a never-Trump faction someday gained control of the Republican Party, or if the party which claims to support conservative family values ever tired of a man who pays off porn stars to hide his extramarital affairs, Trump can still be a Republican for as long as he wants to. And there's nothing anyone inside or outside of the Republican Party can do about it. Thanks for watching. Did you know that America's two major parties were so strange, or that no one, no matter how repugnant, can be prevented from claiming membership in either party? Let me know in the comments. And also be sure to like this video and subscribe so you can see part 2, which I hope will be out in a couple weeks. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.